So imagine it's over 500 years from now. You're on a ship that is so far away from Earth that it takes 10 years for communications to travel from Earth to the ship. You've been out there, at least your ancestors, for over 160 years, and you're approaching the planet upon which you're supposed to begin your new life. But then you find out there's a lot of problems when you arrive. That's the basis for Aurora by Kim Stanley Robinson, and it's the book that I'm reviewing today. Enjoy. Today I'm reviewing Kim Stanley Robinson's Aurora. This is some of the best science fiction I've read in a very long time. It's awesome. This is the story of a spaceship carrying some 2,000 human beings who are traveling across the galaxy to colonize another planet. It's what happens, how it happens, and why it happens. Here goes. So Robinson does a number of things with this story that are very unique and that give it a very special perspective and special take on how sci-fi is normally done. The first thing is, and the first thing you'll notice, is that this book is told by the narrator, and the narrator is the ship. The ship has a artificial intelligence. It's a quantum computer. This future that we're reading about is some 500 years in the future. It's set in 2545 when this book begins. So in 500 years, they have these computers that are just so highly advanced that they're able to take things like ideas and even try to begin to understand concepts like emotion and what's a metaphor and things of that nature. Very interesting, because you have this relationship with this character named Devi. Now Devi is basically the de facto chief engineer of the ship. She's kind of the boss of the ship because she's the one that she's kind of a go-getter and a hard worker, and she understands the ship, and so she is the one that's running around all the time. She has a very stressful life trying to keep the ship going, because at this point when the novel begins, it's been 160 years of space travel. So the ship is experiencing a lot of problems. Things are breaking down, certain systems are getting older and slowing down or not working at all. They've been doing IQ tests and finding that each generation is getting less intelligent, and she's starting to just be fretful over the future of what this plan is. And so that's her character. And what she does is she communicates with the ship, and she basically talks to the ship, almost like you would talk to your journal. And she begins this dialogue with the ship and eventually asks the ship to create a narrative, to write a story about this journey, because she feels it'll be important for future generations to be able to look back and learn about what has happened, right? What's been going on for this 160 years. And so you have the supercomputer, this quantum computer, the ship, begin this slow process of understanding what it means to write. And this is great, especially for all of you who want to be writers out there, because Kim Stanley Robinson uses it as an opportunity to kind of discuss the philosophy of writing. What is a metaphor? And how does human language use metaphors? And how closely does that actually even tie to reality? The ship, for example, being a ship, being a logical computer, has a very difficult time understanding things like go fly a kite or, catch a later. Things like that. The ship is, this doesn't make logical sense. But over time, because it's such an advanced computer, it's able to learn. And so what you see is this really great progression. As the storytelling is proceeding, the ship is becoming more and more adept at telling the story and using metaphors and using similes and using turns of phrase. It's very, very interesting. Was a lot of fun to read, and I think that's an element of this story that sets it apart from any science fiction that I've ever read. where the ship is the narrator. Now, this character Devi that I talked to you about, this kind of de facto engineer, the kind of the head of the ship, so to speak, she has a daughter. And her daughter, they have a very kind of rough relationship because Devi's constantly devoted to the ship. And so her relationship with her daughter is very strained because the daughter, when she's younger, she just views it as, oh, mom's always upset, mom's always angry, mom's always, working on the ship. So Freya has a very close bond with her father. They kind of connect, and their relationship actually persists throughout the story because as they approach this Tau Ceti system, which is where they're headed, which is where Aurora is at, they have to do this massive and very slow and gradual slowing, basically putting on the brakes, so to speak, because the ship was traveling at some percentage of light speed, very, very fast. And because of all the inertial gravity elements, they have to slow down literally over a course of like 20 years or something like that. And there's a lot of complex science and astrophysics in this book, which is great because I enjoy it because I like to learn a little bit about it. It's very interesting. It is hard science. At least it's based on Newtonian physics and all of that. So I enjoy that element of it, but the author does a great job of not being overbearing. You don't feel like you're reading a science book at all, but you do definitely get an education on some level about what potential space travel could be like. So anyways, that's a lot of fun. So Freya's relationship with her mother being very strained it takes an interesting turn in the future. When they do arrive at this Aurora and they're preparing to go down, it turns out that Freya's mother, Devi, is very ill, and she actually does not survive. She dies of cancer. And so a great part of this story is Freya'S character arc of her kind of being this, precocious teenage daughter who has a lot of angst with her mother, into someone who comes to almost fill the role of her mother. And begins to, later on in the story, to take on a lot of the same responsibilities and although she has a different skill set, she does a lot of the same functions and is a very important person on the ship in relation to all the other people. And that's a very interesting part of the story as well. Now, when they get to Aurora, they send down some colonists, not the bulk of the ship, not all of the ship, just some people slowly but surely. Because you can imagine they're on this new planet. They got to make sure the air is safe and all these different tests that they run. And what happens is it turns out that everyone that goes down to Aurora, except for one person, ends up dying. And they find out after traveling 160 years to get here, it's not going to work. We got to go back. And there's a lot of things that happen. I'm not going to give everything away, but this one person that survives from this planet continues on with the ship, but the rest that were fleeing from the planet, trying to get back to ship, it actually creates like this battle where the people on the ship who are safe, who haven't been to Aurora, they're not contaminated. They don't want those people coming back onto the ship because they're afraid they would kill everybody. So this battle ensues, and what's very interesting and super fascinating part of this story is the ship itself begins to step in and take action to keep peace on the ship. It will do things like removing air slowly from a certain room of the ship to make certain characters like pass out because they were planning some mischief. And the ship begins to make announcements to the people saying, I am the rule of law. You need to listen to me. And it began to create this sense, this very ominous feeling that this ship could turn on these people at any moment. The ship has all the power, and that's a very interesting element as well. I'm not going to give away what actually happens in the story, but it's very, very fascinating. Kim Stanley Robinson really knocked it out of the park. This book is successful on so many levels. The characters are interesting. The plot is fascinating. You're just constant, your space travel. There's all kinds of things going on left and right. That's, it's one problem to another, you can imagine. Now, one of the major themes that Kim Stanley Robinson brings out is this. He is of the opinion that humans are not going to be able to colonize other planets. It's very interesting. Most of the sci-fi authors, of this genre seem, at least in their fiction, to make it seem like, yeah, it's going to happen. It's inevitable, right? We're going to eventually colonize the universe, so to speak. We're going to send out our ships. We're going to have space stations. We're going to have all these things. That's where they're headed. That's their trajectory. Well, Kim Stanley Robinson perhaps has a more realistic view of things. He says this basically, and it's kind of the point of the book. He says, okay, here's the thing. Here's the situation. First off, if there's any planet in our universe that's going to support human life, he says it can't just be an analog to Earth. In other words, it can't just be kind of close to Earth. He says because it'll be one of two things. One, it's either going to already have some form of life on it, in which case the life is totally foreign to us and hence probably dangerous to us, like some sort of bacteria, a virus, anything that just is not part of our biological structure, and it'll kill us. He says, or you'll have a dead planet, a planet that doesn't have life on it. He says in that case, we'd have to terraform it, basically, in other words, make it come alive. And he says, we can't do that. It's too much. It's too hard. It's too difficult, especially, here's the major factor, the distances that we have to travel to get to something like that. So he thinks that the idea of these massively long space journeys, he says they're almost infeasible. They won't happen. It's too difficult. It's too expensive. It's too dangerous. And kind of the big one is it'll change who we are. Humans aren't meant to live on a spaceship. And this is an awesome part of the book. He talks about this at length at the end of the book. And he says he believes human life is meant to live on its home planet. And I thought it was really interesting and fascinating kind of conclusion, especially for a sci-fi guy, to conclude that, we're meant to live on Earth. We're meant to be here under the sun as God intended. I think that's a fantastic conclusion, and I love it. It's not that he's saying, let's not travel in space, let's not do exciting things and explore, but rather, realistically, let's approach it from a human perspective and not simply from some sort of, scientific probe perspective. I would love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about this concept? Are humans simply meant to live on Earth and not to colonize other planets in our universe? What do you think about that? Are you curious to read this book? Has this kind of inspired you to read some science fiction? It's fascinating. Thank you so much for watching. Again, my name is Jeremy. This is MathomBooks, and this has been a review of Aurora by Kim Stanley Robinson.